getting some of these things on that pathway? Where are you at?
Well, so I am like at the very, very beginning. I will start my third class just for my bachelor's program next week. So I am at the very start of
That's
this.
exciting though. What an exciting time to be in and getting to kind of soak in all the information about nutrition and dietetics.
Yes.
Exactly. It's starting with the end in mind is always a good practice. So
Yeah.
since we're rural and we are hoping that Amber is planning to stay with a long time, stay with us a very, very long time, and we enjoy having her on our team, and that we love that she set this goal for herself. We're hoping that maybe in our rural area we could be creative and think of ways to help her along this pathway and journey when she gets closer to those points as well. So.
Absolutely. I love that idea of starting with the end in sight because I think there are options as far as getting to that RD credential and knowing all of the options, I think is really helpful to make sure that you find the option that really works the best for you for sure.
Yes.
I'm going to share my screen here and we'll go through the slides, but um again, this is fairly informal, but I want to make sure that you have the official um kind of pitch here and the information that you might need again, especially since we're recording this, so that you can go back to it and revisit it as time goes on. So here, let me start this and get this going here. All right, Ivy, I can still see you. Can you see my slides?
Yeah, yes, we can see your slides as well.
Perfect. Wonderful. Well, Ivy, I met you at the WIC Partners meeting, but Amber, my name is Lisa Clark, and I'm the Dietetic Internship Coordinator for this Dietetic Internship program. So we are housed within the Maricopa County Department of Public Health here up in Phoenix. And this picture here on the slide is actually our most recent cohort of interns that graduated. So half of these individuals completed our WIC track, which is what we're talking about today. And then the other half completed our non-WIC track, which is kind of separate, but still falls under the same umbrella. And let's see, half of the individuals, more than half, 4 out of 7 so far have passed the RD exam, which is really exciting. And all the WIC ones, of course, still have their jobs at WIC, but even the non-WIC ones have found jobs as RDs, which is always exciting. We love when our graduates graduate and move on successfully into the employment as a registered dietitian. So what we'll talk about today is just an overview of what this program is, where it is on the pathway to becoming an RD, what the specific eligibility requirements are to actually apply to this. We'll touch a little bit on the application process just so that you're aware, but I think the bigger parts of this will be focused more on what is this program and then when are you eligible? And then of course I'll have time for questions, but please chime in and ask any questions along the way as we're going through these slides. So talking a little bit about this program first. So when we're looking at the pathway to becoming a registered dietitian, you have to complete that undergraduate education. A master's degree, I'm going to kind of put pause on just for a minute because it's not a linear process, but we are kind of that final step on the pathway before you become eligible to sit for the RDN exam. So in addition to having that specific undergraduate nutrition degree, that DPD, um, and eventually a graduate degree, you have to complete 1,000 hours of supervised practice at rotation sites. That's kind of the practicum, right? You have to learn how to actually be an RD at the end of this before you can sit for that exam. So our program provides those 1,000 hours. We are public health focused. I will say that that has kind of an asterisk next to it because any type of dietetic internship supervised practice program still has to provide clinical rotations, food and nutrition management rotations, usually done in either like a hospital kitchen or at a school district. And then a couple other types of rotations. Every single program has to provide something in those areas. But the rest of the time outside of that is really dependent on what the program wants to provide. And that's where our public health focus comes into play. We have specific rotations of course, in WIC, because that is the focus of this track, but also within our Maricopa County food systems team, and also some different farm tours, understanding a little bit about the food system that we have here in Arizona and some of the history. So our hope is that our graduates are leaving our program with a lens of public health in mind, because whether you work in a clinical setting, whether you work in a school district, wherever you work, public health is everywhere. And it's just not as simple as just telling people to eat more fruits and vegetables. That's not the way that this works. So that's kind of my caveat to this, is that you still complete clinical rotations, you still complete food and nutrition management, but in the other areas, we do focus on public health. We do accept up to 6 interns each year from Arizona WIC local agencies. So what that means is that every single year, we will take a class of up to 6, and it can be from any WIC agency across the state. So it really depends. It's kind of dependent on the year, how many people are actually eligible for the program. This current group that just graduated from that last picture that I showed you both, 2 came from Maricopa County and 1 came from Valle del Sol. And then in this next cohort that's coming in, we actually have only 5 interns, and all 5 of them are coming from Maricopa County. But it just kind of depends on the year. But we do accept interns from WIC local agencies. So as I mentioned, this program is providing those 1,000 supervised practice hours that are required to be an RD. That's the practical training once you complete the education side. And then the benefit from both ends, I would say, it's a mutually beneficial relationship where you as the graduate are contracted to work for Arizona WIC for 2 years after passing the RD exam. And then, of course, on the Arizona WIC side, they get a guarantee of an RD for 2 years afterwards. So it's again, mutually beneficial relationship where we're making sure that there are public health RDs to staff these important positions, but then you get to complete the program with some extra special perks, which we'll talk about here in, I think, the next slide. So I know you're just getting started on your education journey, Amber, but I'm sure you've already seen it, that this is just not the cheapest pathway to go down. I mean, becoming an RD and getting to that final credential can be expensive by the time you add up the education, supervised practice, the cost to take the exam, study materials, and all of those things. And so one of the key benefits of this program is that it is actually a lower cost path to the RD credential. There is no other program like this in the US where we specifically recruit from Arizona WIC to guarantee Arizona WIC RDs at the end. But in the pathway of doing that, there is no tuition that you pay to this program. We cover all the attempts that it takes for you to pass the RD exam. It's a tough test, which you can worry about in a little while. But it's a tough test, and it usually takes a couple times to pass. But each time that you take the test, it's $225. And because your employment and the contract fulfillment is dependent on you becoming an RD and getting that credential, our grant will continue to reimburse until you pass that exam, whether it takes you 1 time or it takes you 4 times. We also pay for all of the study materials as well. So we're really trying to make this a low-cost pathway to getting to that credential as much as we can control. And one of the key aspects within that is that you continue to receive your compensation and benefits throughout the entirety of the internship. So compared to, I would honestly say, most dietetic internships programs where you have to pay a tuition and usually you can't work, it's considered a full-time gig. Instead, you're continuing to receive your compensation and benefits. You remain an employee of the agency that you're working for. The agency gets, I don't want to call it a stipend, but they get funding from ADHS to cover your position while you're gone. But you continue to receive your pay and benefits, and then you don't pay tuition. So as far as cost goes for completing this program, I don't want to say minimal because there are still costs associated with having to get through the education piece of it, but we try to really minimize how much money you're having to pay for this. So I've mentioned graduate degree options a couple times, and I have another slide right after this that talks about it. But the key thing that I do want to just highlight on this slide is that we have flexibility with graduate degree options. You have to have a master's degree to sit for the RDN exam. So it used to be just a bachelor's degree. Starting this year, now it's a master's degree as well, but we have a lot of flexibility. And especially in your case, you're so early in the process you've got all the options in the world for this. So we can continue to talk about that as you're going through the process. We do specifically tailor rotations to an intern's interests, and we do schedule the rotations. I will say this is kind of one that we'll have to kind of case by case base it here, just because you are not located in Maricopa County. Um, our rotations are primarily located in Maricopa County. So because we're kind of on the early end of the timing of this, I would say as many connections as you can build in your area will give you the better opportunity to complete a rotation where you're at right now. Because right now we don't have anything in your area where you could complete those rotations, especially now that COVID, I don't want to say is better, but it's not the same world we were living in a few years ago where there were more virtual options for rotations. All of our rotations are in person and in Maricopa County. But as you go through your education, if you can meet individuals, probably primarily in like a hospital setting, or people who work in outpatient clinical or food and nutrition management at a hospital or a school district, something that teaches food service, we can establish affiliate agreements with those organizations to get you into rotations there. But right now, as it stands, we don't have a network in Navajo County.
So with those potential sites, would they need to have a registered dietitian? Like if the foods say no. Okay.
No. So
So
our
that's
accrediting body gives a lot of leeway for that because there are school districts, as an example, that don't staff an
mhm.
RD. So ultimately, the person just needs to be a subject matter expert in their field. So, like a food and nutrition director at a school district is
Mhm.
fine, and they don't have to be an RD.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I know that's kind of a big one with another big asterisk, but any other questions about the rotations themselves and how that would look?
The public health portion that is maybe partially at the WIC clinic, could that be done within our WIC clinic here in Navajo County?
Yes. So during that public health WIC rotation, the WIC track dietetic interns, they complete 1 week of like a WIC management rotation. So they learn how things work at their originating agency. And then there are some WIC work weeks scattered throughout the internship where you're not receiving supervised practice hours, but you are returning to your WIC clinic to just do your standard work. And so what I can at least do is bundle these together so you're not like popping down to Phoenix for 1 week, back up to Navajo County, down and up. We can kind of bundle it together and keep it all in one place. But yes, we can absolutely utilize your agency there for anything WIC related. And that's the
Okay,
idea, right? Is to teach and train so that you can come back as an RD for that local agency.
that's awesome.
I think the main ones would just be anything clinically related, and then
Mm.
anything like
Food.
food service related, because we do have
And
to make sure
then
that interns can complete those
okay,
competencies.
for sure. We have one hospital in our area. Um, and Amber does live within that vicinity, so that's kind of nice because Navajo County is huge, it's spread out. So yeah, Summit Healthcare. So that would be the one that we would need to make those connections with the food and nutrition department there, some of the dietitians, and then either school foods for the food and nutrition management, or I don't know, does the hospital food service count? So it could be
Yes,
all within
it could all be
Summit.
within that. Yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
again, Amber, you're still pretty early on in the process, but it never hurts to start building connections. Again, we
Mm-hmm.
have time, but it's something where if you can establish that connection, we can get an affiliate agreement in place with them and kind of go from there. But again, we've got a while to work with. Um, but yes, we can absolutely do that if those connections are made. And I think for the most part, it seems like RDs and people in the field do want to give back and they do want to help students, and especially like rural access areas, they know the need. They live it every day too, right? And they know the need for professionals in this area.
Mm-hmm.
So I would just kind of keep that on your radar as something that would be really helpful helpful as you're kind of preparing to get into a program like this.
And I
Any
can help
other?
you with the making the connections and that kind of thing, because that'll add, credibility to your request and just promoting how we want to have it be a positive experience for the site as well as for us.
And I know you said like hospitals and schools. Does that also expand? I'm just thinking of like different places in case those don't want to do it. Can you also do, I know some nursing homes have like
Mhm.
dietitian. Would that be something, or even like a Head Start program?
For clinical, you could do like a nursing home or long-term care facility. That would count. You can definitely do that. Um, I'm thinking if you have any like acute rehab sort of hospitals, they usually staff an RD. My suggestion, because in my other side gig, I'm an adjunct faculty at Grand Canyon, and it is a distance program where interns have to find all of their own rotations. And my students are always, it's a struggle sometimes. But my suggestion is just calling in the main line and saying, hey, I'm a student looking to work with an RD. Can I talk to your RD? And kind of starting from there. I think that there's more luck with phone calls than with emails. It's really easy to ignore emails. It's harder when you get a person on the line who has a voice, and it's just
Mhm.
it's harder to say no over the phone. And so especially if you don't know the person that you're reaching out to, sometimes like who to even reach out to, just calling the main line. If you have any outpatient like renal clinics like Fresenius or DaVita, those could count. Any oncology or cancer clinics, those can count. Um,
Indian
Usually
Health
clinical is the hardest.
Services.
Indian Health Services
Mhm.
absolutely can count.
So sometimes it's like knowing someone, and it may be visiting them or starting with the food service manager, because some of these facilities, they might even contract out their RD services, and so that person's not even really on site very often.
Exactly.
And so just getting creative in that way. But
Yes.
that was a really good thought, Amber. Good job.
Yeah, wherever you can get it. Our accrediting body it does not say explicitly that you do have to complete it at a hospital. And I would say that at least with my GCU students, and even we're transitioning even in Maricopa County, our WIC track away from doing inpatient clinical and trying to focus more on like community health centers, because there
Hmm.
are sometimes clinical sides to community health centers, usually can be paired with WIC even,
Hmm.
because it's just more relevant, and it's the population that y'all are working with. So we're making some changes there too.
What about like group homes or mental health facilities that may be in our area?
I could probably swing a mental health facility.
Hmm.
We've got some flexibility. So
Okay.
I would say make connections where you have them, see what you can do.
And it's good
Hmm.
to have time.
Whatever you can't quite get from, I mean, hypothetically, if you got, your only clinical experience was at an outpatient renal clinic, obviously there's other things to clinical nutrition that you're going to want to know for the RD exam. I can bridge some of that gap for you, which I'm actually doing with this next group coming in too. So
How would
we
you
can
do
bridge
that?
gaps.
How
I
would
have
you
a
bridge a gap?
whole like curriculum to do that. Um,
Okay.
and it's one of those things where just because you rotate at like one of the big hospitals, it's not a guarantee you're going to pass the exam either. I mean, I have
Hmm.
one intern from this last cohort who did 8 weeks at the biggest hospital in Arizona and still is having a hard time passing the exam. So I feel like it's not necessarily, they're not linked. It's not to say that you won't learn something there that you won't learn in kind of my curriculum, but it's not a guarantee that you'll pass the exam just because you rotated in a hospital. So it's a little bit complicated, but we do have flexibility, I think is my point. So we can make
Is
something
your
work.
curriculum something you developed for this program, or is it something that comes from somewhere? I'm just curious.
It's a little bit of both. So my background is clinical. So I was a clinical RD and I am a CNFC still. And then I developed and teach courses at GCU specific to medical nutrition therapy. So I've adopted a lot of what I've done for their graduate degree program into a more applicable version for the internship to cover any deficiencies that we might have.
That's awesome. You really have a finger on the pulse of what's needed for the exam and what the students need, and making sure that there's no gaps, because that was a question of mine in a rural area. If you do these experiences, you may miss something, and that's not the goal, of course. And it's not the site's fault or the
No.
preceptor's fault. So I think that's awesome. You have a curriculum in place.
And it's there just for redundancies too. Some of it started with COVID because we couldn't get interns into hospitals. It just wasn't an option anymore for a year. Um, but again, it's all very subjective. I think the way that it's really interesting that this whole concept of supervised practice relies on RDs in the field wanting to give back. And
Mhm.
sometimes I get complaints from even like the large hospitals when my interns are rotating there saying, I just learned how to be a Banner employee. I didn't understand the why behind why we did what we did. I just now know that this is how Banner wants me to do it. So there's always going to be a little bit of subjectivity, variability in the experience that you get. And so that's why we have these redundancies built into the program to make sure that you get the content that you actually need to pass that test.
Mhm.
And that ties into my last point on this slide, which is the supportive environment. So we're not a university, we're not teaching classes on the side, at least within the scope of, the position that I'm in right now. I dedicate 40 hours a week to supporting this program, supporting our interns, and then my manager. And then we also have an assistant coordinator who's part-time. We've got almost 2 FTEs of people that are focused on making sure that our graduates are successful, making sure that our interns are successful, troubleshooting any challenges along the way, and doing things like this to get kind of the word out there that we exist.
Great support. And then I don't know if you mentioned this, but it used to be that you had to do the match system. But with this program, that's not, you don't have to compete. You don't have to do the match. Is that correct?
That is correct. So I have a slide coming up when we get
Oh,
to the
I
application
skipped.
process about the match, because it's gone now. There is no more match, whether you're doing this track or any
Hmm.
other dietetic internship. But no, this is a
True.
really straightforward process that is,
Hmm.
relatively speaking, low risk to apply once you meet the eligibility criteria.
That's awesome.
So speaking of eligibility criteria, again, there's been a lot of information circulating around of what's required versus what's not required, who can, who can't. And at the end of the day, we're trying to really simplify the process. So in order to be eligible to apply to this program, you have to have that verification of completion of a didactic program in dietetics. So it's the DPD verification statement, which is that specific undergraduate degree that is accredited by Ascend, to apply to this program. So that's the big one. And then you just need at least 6 months of full-time employment at an Arizona WIC agency before the application due date of January 15th. Obviously, you're employed at Arizona WIC, but I think the key thing that we have changed since the last round of this is that you do not have to have a master's degree to apply. Um, we had originally said you had to have a certain amount complete and blah, 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 and made it really, really complicated. And we've streamlined and said that if you come in with a master's degree, awesome. If you don't have one, we've got options for you. So as far as what those options look like, we're flexible. So if an intern already has a master's degree at the time that they apply, they can complete the internship in 8 months. So it would be a September through April timeframe. But for interns who are applying that don't have a master's degree and have not started a master's degree, they can complete the internship at the same time as a master's degree through 2 options that I'll walk through on the next slide in about 15 months. So what that would look like is you submit your application by January 15th, indicate in your application that you don't have a master's degree. Once you're accepted into the program, we give you 2 options to then apply to for master's degrees. You would start classes in summer, do a summer semester, a fall semester, a spring semester, and then one more summer semester. And at that point, you would be eligible to sit for the RD exam. So we have 2 options at this point. So I will say that if you're kind of that middle person who has already started a master's degree and it's not one of the two programs that I'm going to talk about on this next slide, that's awesome too. We just need to have a chit chat about it because I need to know approximately when you're planning on graduating. I think one of the key things about this master's degree requirement is you don't actually have to have a master's in nutrition. You can get a master's in anything. It could be an MBA, you could do it in education, you could do it in public health. But if you aren't choosing one of the options that we've already outlined, we need to talk about it because the time frame might not work with the internship and it might mean you need to be in a different cohort. But if you are applying and at that point you have not started a master's degree, you will need to select one of these two options here because we have to show that you can complete the supervised practice and the master's degree within a certain time frame. What our accrediting body doesn't want is for interns to complete supervised practice and then take another year or two to finish a master's degree. We have to show that our graduates can finish their master's degree within 4 months of completing supervised practice. So if supervised practice ends in April, that means that a master's degree has to be completed in August. So again, if you're applying at the point you're applying, you don't have a master's degree, you get to pick one of these two options. They're both online. One's through U of A, one's through ASU. U of A's program is a professional science master's in applied nutrition. ASU is a Master of Science in Nutritional Sciences and Dietetics. I'll send these slides once we're done with this presentation, but you can click the codes or scan the QR codes to learn more about those. And just know that these are not associated with, or let me rephrase that. There is an outside cost associated with these master's degree options. So when I say that this program is not tuition and the different benefits of this program, we're not connected to ASU or U of A's programs. We are just recommending these as two options. So you would still need to pay the tuition for completing a master's degree for one of these options. But we are really encouraging everyone to look into your agency's tuition reimbursement policies. We've had quite a few past grads utilize tuition reimbursement to pay for their master's degrees, and they paid significantly less for their master's degrees because they utilize tuition reimbursement. Does that make sense what I'm saying there?
Yes.
I know I say we're streamlining and simplifying, but the reality is it's still just a little bit complicated. But I would say where you're at, Amber, and you kind of your journey, you can kind of pick and choose how you want to do things. I mean, if you want to pick an option like one of these two, great, but just know that you do have options. Like masters in public health tend to take a little bit longer. And there's more credit hours associated with them, but maybe it's more applicable to what you do. You have options and you don't have to get a master's degree in nutrition to be eligible to sit for the exam. You just have to have a master's degree.
Okay.
Questions
So
about graduate degrees?
that master's degree could be in progress and she could still apply if she was not wanting to go with either of these, but she would just want to talk about it so you know the time frame and get the plan nailed down. I gotcha.
Yes.
So when
And
I get close
so,
to there, just because I'm going through Grand Canyon University to get my bachelor's, and so I'm there. I haven't figured out what's after that quite yet.
yeah. And if you have questions along the way too, because there are multiple pathways to getting to the RD credential. I mean, GCU has their own pathway that's not tied to us, where there are costs associated with it. But that's what I teach for, is for they have a combined supervised practice and master's degree in about 2 years. So, I mean, obviously it's a separate program than what we're talking about today, but there are a lot of different options for getting to that RD credential. So I'm always happy to chat just about what the options are and help clarify too. Okay, so we're not going to spend a ton of time talking about the application process just because you're still steps away from that. But what I do want to mention that Ivy brought up is that there is no match for this. You don't, we don't use the STEM centralized system that most programs do use. And that is allowed because we're within, we'll call it all of Arizona WIC. So it's allowed, we're allowed to do that. But for most supervised practice programs, there's a system called DICAS that you have to apply through. There's application fees associated with using diecast. Most programs have application fees. Our process is really simple, is as soon as you meet those eligibility criteria, you have a DPD verification statement and you've worked for Arizona WIC for 6 months, you email an application to me. There's no fee associated with it. And it's just an email with all of the paperwork that you have that show that you've met the eligibility criteria.
That's so cool. I love it.
It's again, we're trying to get rid of as many costs associated with this as possible. And it's also low risk because I don't want someone to not apply because of cost barriers. If you're interested in applying, you should be able to apply. And so our deadline is January 15th each year at midnight, and we'll start accepting applications on October 1st. But we don't really, we wouldn't review anybody until after January 15th anyway. So there's no benefit in submitting early, I would say.
Okay.
Our application timeline is here. It's on our website. You can review it in the slides, but what I want to show you is really just what we need in an application. And ultimately, what this, again, the point here is making this lower cost is I just need unofficial transcripts. So if you went through like the formal diecast system, you have to pay for official transcripts, but you haven't been accepted to a program at that point. So there's risk, right? Where you might pay for something that you end up, if you didn't get matched somewhere or get accepted somewhere, then you've eaten the cost of that. And so all I ask for in an application is unofficial transcripts for where you got your DPD, and then unofficial transcripts for any graduate degree coursework that you started or completed. And then once you've been accepted, that's when I will get official transcripts from you. So that's what needs to come into from an application standpoint. We need who would complete your letter of recommendation. We send that form out, so all we need is just their email address and their name, a copy of your DPD verification statement that's required, a resume. There's a letter on our website you have to sign in, a personal statement. But again, trying to make it super straightforward. All of this just gets emailed to me with no fancy diecast system and no additional fees. The next couple of slides talk about what goes into an application, and I'm just going to we'll skip these for right now. All this information is on our website. We've got all of this and more about just some of our practice sites and what the schedule of the program looks like, our handbook, all of that detail is on the website. If you do have more questions about that. But I think at this point, just know that I'm here as a resource. Again, there's pathways to get to the RD credential. It's complicated. There's options out there for you. This is one option that can be a lower cost option, and we're willing to make things work and figure out some of these more rural rotations. And then again, the benefits of this program are that you continue to receive your pay and your benefits, and then most of the costs associated with the supervised practice itself are covered by our grant. So with that, what questions do you still have that I didn't answer?
So I just want to, once I finish my bachelor's degree and it's time to make that next step, I just kind of need a little direction, I guess, for like that. Like, I don't know what's after my bachelor's degree for the most part.
Yeah, I would say that here, I'm going to stop recording just because we're going to end up with a really long recording here.